Hi, I'm Brooke Crump,
I'm William Tingler.
and today we will be interviewing Dr. Erin B. Wagner. She is a professor for the Communication Studies Department, and we're going to be asking her a little bit about her background and her life, and then we're going to give more information about our topics that we did for our symposium project.
Tell us a little about yourself, the background in education.
So I am Dr. Erin B. Wagner. I am an assistant professor in the Communication Studies Department at Longwood University. My background in my education specifically is very interesting because I actually when I originally went to college, I went on a full scholarship playing the trumpet. And so I was a music major. But while I was there, I switched to and found a love for women, gender, and sexuality studies, which led me across multiple discovering what major to do, what to do with my life, things like that. Ended up with an English degree, actually. Switched gears, ended up with an English degree. And now I have 7 college degrees, 2 undergrads and 5 graduate degrees, including my doctorate in communication studies.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Maysville, Kentucky. It's a little river town it's just overlooking the Ohio River. So when I would go out to my back porch, we were right on the train tracks by the river. So I saw Ohio River when I would eat outside or when I went out to play or when I went to the train tracks, even though my mom told me not to. So it was, no, I grew up in this, it was a small town. It's known for being the birthplace of bourbon, places. It was very rural. It was a very rural Appalachian kind of town.
I want to go a little bit more in depth. So, what was your journey to get here, especially in terms of the LGBTQ plus community?
I have a really long story with that, so I'll try to condense it for you. I came out. I always knew. I knew since I was in second grade. Oops, something's going on here. I didn't know what it was called. I just knew something was different, and it had to do with gender and sexuality in some way. And so when I got older, I started to learn what that was. But keep in mind, growing up in the 80s and 90s in rural Appalachian Kentucky. And so a lot of the messaging, a lot of the stuff that I got was negative, and didn't see positive media representation. I didn't see any of this stuff. And so I was the type of person who was in love with media, TV. That's kind of, I grew up on it. And so watching it and coming home from school and trying to find snippets or something, right? And so when I was in high school, I realized what it was. And my freshman year of high school, decided I'm not going to date any of my friends because I know I'm going to come out later. I'm very aware that I'm queer and that I'm going to come out later in life. I don't want to hurt any of my guy friends by putting on a show or having a beard or anything. I'm sure that I did in some ways, but I just had that internal battle within myself where it was just very lonely. It was very lonely because it was me. I wasn't out. I ended up coming out my senior year of high school, right before graduation. My mom got really quiet because keep in mind, 2001, rural Appalachia. My mom got really quiet, not for a lack of support, more for I'm scared. I'm scared for my kid that this is what they're going to do with their lives. And so I actually went back into the closet. I ended up coming out again and staying out in my freshman year of college. And I've been out ever since. It's been quite a journey, but it's, interestingly enough, came out online because there was this thing called ICQ. It was a messenger, it was old school messenger, pre-social media. And so that's how I came out, because I felt comfortable having that conversation with my mom, or who was it that I came out to. I was comfortable without having that here, let me see that nonverbal disappointment or scare or fear. We've had conversations much later after things got comfortable, because when you're queer, a lot of times what happens, and it's very fascinating, a lot of times what happens is you go through these stages of coming out. And I was in that. I was very much in that. I became obsessed once I came out of the queer community, and I made friends with the queer community. I joined the queer group on campus. And this was 2001. Keep in mind, it doesn't feel like it, but that was 21 years. No, was that 21 years ago? That was 21 years ago, y'all. And so it baffles me that how much I have seen changed since then, since I came out. Because I was the era of Matthew Shepard. I was the era of Brandon Tina. So that was the message that I got from queer representation. And for some reason, somehow, I got led down this path of becoming a queer media scholar, of a person who wants to create change through queer film, through either creating it or even just analyzing it, researching how the media impacts conversations, relationships with people in the queer community and people who interact with people in the queer community. So that's, like I said, a longer story, condensed, because there is much more to my story, but that's what I believe you need in the sense of like change and how did I get to this point? Why did I want to change? Because I wanted to be, I found confidence in myself in my like late 20s, early 30s. And I just wanted to be that change. I wanted to no longer just sit back and let life like just it felt like I was almost just floating through life. I wanted to do something about it. So it was more than just saying, hey, I'm a lesbian. I would like to do something about this. I actually got am I allowed to curse on this? I got my ass up and did something about it. And so that's when I went to go get my doctorate. That's when I went to start building up this scholarship, this production, these things that really got me to the point where I am today.
Tell us about your work and what you do and why it matters.
So I am a communication studies professor. Interestingly enough, used to be an English professor, but I joined the dark side of communication studies very specifically because what interested me in the English field was I found myself doing a lot of rhetorical analysis specifically on films and film analysis and TV shows. And so I was like, you know what? This is what I was talking about a while ago, very specifically about getting my ass off the couch and actually doing something about it. So I started to get active and become part of the community more, learning more about who I am, about the community, the things that I could do to make change. It took me a while to get there, but I did finally find a place or a home at Longwood University that has opened the doors for me to actually do a lot of the changes and the things that I really want to do. So I'm able to teach classes like LGBTQ plus in the media and create class like this class. It's a passion project of mine. It's something that I've wanted to do in the 15 years that I've taught college. And it's the idea that media is resistance. So media is resistance in the sense of we become the creators to change the conversation. And I want that positivity. I want that visibility. I want the hard conversations because you can't make change without the hard conversations. So that's very much what I do with my scholarship, the stuff that I research, and the films and classes, the films that I create and the classes that I teach. It's very much the idea of change agent as resistance. Yeah.
What were some pivotal moments, and then what were some obstacles, or what are still obstacles that you face in terms of both the LGBTQ plus community, but also just with what you're doing in everyday life?
Some obstacles that I came across the biggest obstacle was myself. This is true when there's such a link to mental health issues with the LGBTQ plus community, the queer community, and I'm definitely part of that. I had a lot of soul searching to do. I didn't have confidence. I had low self-esteem, and I still struggle with that to a degree. It's gotten better over the years, or I should say I've learned to navigate or manage it more. But it's still there. The anxiety's still there. The depression's still there. That self-esteem issues are still there. So the biggest obstacle, or what RuPaul would call your inner saboteur, it's myself. It's very much myself in the sense of I didn't push myself. I didn't. I was afraid of what this would look like, or I was afraid what this would do to my relationships. I was afraid. It's a lot of what it was. So a lot of it was fear of failing, fear of putting myself out there, becoming the person that makes these changes in that sense. And to this day, it still is a little bit of my own obstacle is myself. But then you also have the obstacles of not everybody's accepting of the queer community. And I'm aware of that. And so I learned to navigate how to have those conversations, how to embrace those harder, tougher conversations with people who don't want to even hear it. It's a challenge. It's a challenge that I'm willing to take on very much because, like I said, the media's resistance. I'm here. I want to make that change, and the way I can do that is with this production, with the scholarship that I do, with the classes that I teach.
Talking about change, what is something that you have wanted to change within our community, and what are some ways you've tried to implement that?
Visibility is a big thing for me. Visibility and obviously justice is like all y'all. Y'all means all y'all, right? And so visibility is where it starts. Media is for a lot of people where visibility of the queer community starts. The very first trans person that I ever saw was in a film. Was it great representation? No. Was it horrible? No. So I actually got lucky in the sense that my first exposure to transgender persons was with a moderately positive representation, but that's not the case for the majority of people. And so when you have that positive representation in media, it very much gets you to that low. That's where a lot of people see their first queer person is through the media. Or they hear, oh, so-and-so is this person, or oh, so-and-so. So there's talk right behind people's backs a lot. And for me, that's where I got there, I guess, is oh, I could do this. This is something that I love to do. I somewhat have an eye for it with creative because I came from a creative background. My very first job ever was at a photo studio. So creating like films and looking at color and framing things because it was like the 1990s, right? And so we still had film that you moved across a board and you had to push buttons to decide what colors to make them pop out. And so I did have somewhat of a natural eye for that, and I just moved it onto very specifically this with digital media, with production, film production, TV production, things like that.
So now I want to go into some of our topic questions. If it's not too much to ask, I know you have children. What type of family planning method did you go with, and were there any obstacles along the way?
Yes, I have an interesting story. I never, with regards to family planning, I knew I wanted children. I knew I wanted a family. It was just, I don't know why. I don't even know what it was in me. I like children. I enjoy children. I wanted to be like that change agent, right? To become somebody's parent, to love a child, to bring that into my life, that we could love one another or whatever, with children. So my family planning story is actually interesting because I'm actually divorced. I was married before, and so we had a lot of family planning conversations. And our original plan was to do the whole one carries. My wife at the time would carry the child that came from my egg so that we were both connected. But because of biological things and because of health insurance, it ended up being me. And so I actually went through 4 rounds of intrauterine insemination. I'm still thinking about it. It's making me a little uncomfortable. And then 1 round of IVF. It was very, the doctors and people, and I'm sure that this isn't true for everybody, but I was miserable. The things I did with my body to try to become pregnant, I jacked up my body. I was a runner. I was running like a lot, running 5Ks and things on the frequent, right? And so I gained about 60 pounds in like 3 months trying to make a child. And we did end up getting 1 egg out of that, and we tried the insemination. It didn't work. And I actually felt a sense of relief. Because in the cards for me, I wanted children, but I didn't think I would ever be able to carry them. I didn't think I would be physically or mentally stable enough to go through a pregnancy. And that worried me, hence the original plan. So that didn't work out. Years later, we're still married, and we just have the conversation about foster kids. Okay, this is the next idea. So we ended up getting these two siblings, a sibling pair, because when we had a conversation, we very much wanted siblings. We wanted a sibling pair, and we both felt confident or comfortable working with trauma-based children. Very specifically because my ex-wife was a social worker and I was a communication professor who knows or studies interpersonal communication and how, like meta communication, how to approach that. So we had those conversations. This is what we chose. And we ended up being placed with two beautiful children who I have still today. Even post-divorce, I kept the children. They're still in foster care. We are actually at the moment in negotiation for adoption finally. It was one of those rare cases that just dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. So we're going on 3 years and finally getting to that conversation where I can actually start adopting the children. So my journey started back in 2017 with trying to have children with my partner, then ending up health insurance and things. I tried it, ended up not working. Several years later, we come back to the conversation with foster children, and now I have 2 hot messes of children that I love.
Do you think that the LGBTQ plus community, when it comes to family planning, has more obstacles compared to those that are not a part of the community?
This was a worry of me. This is one of the reasons. So when we tried to get pregnant, or when I would try to get pregnant very specifically, we lived in Connecticut. There was a lot more equality and laws and things. And this was post Obergefell v. Hodges too, so it was there were some still obstacles and stuff. I remember when we were going through the IVF, IUI, whatever it's called, insemination stuff. The paperwork was very open, was very accepting. It was very much, even though I was carrying it, we did the paperwork before we even put the baby in me. That we were both parents, and so it was right at the beginning in Connecticut. But when we came to Virginia, one of my biggest fears was, oh Lord, I'm moving back to the South, and all the stuff that comes up internally from being a queer person growing up in the South. The very specifically, when we went through the training process, I was very concerned. I did a lot of research. I did a lot of stuff, and the laws and things in Virginia were a lot different than Connecticut. And it was also no longer our biological children. So what do we do with that? I'm not going to lie and pretend like, oh, it was great. I was worried. I was scared, and I'm still scared today a little bit because I'm in the process of trying to adopt my children right now. I've had these kids with me the majority of their life. They have been with me the majority of their life because they're still young. And because of laws, because of changing laws, what happens if I'm the mom that they know, that they've known the majority of their life, that the law says, no, we don't know about that. You be lady, you be liking the ladies, we don't know about that. And so that's always in my mind. That's always on my mind of, are they going to let me do this? Even when I went through the training, a lot of the questions that I asked, because we used this specific group called United Methodist Family Services. I had some bad experiences with some Methodist churches growing up, so I've got this negative connotation in my head of religion, particularly with the Methodist religion, and me being queer. And so I'm asking these questions. What happens? What are the laws? What do we do? And the UMFS is the company that I work with, have been beautiful through the process in terms of being supportive, in terms of being very much, no, this is a family. You are a family. And it's never been about the gay thing. It's never been about the gay thing with UMFS for me. But I did express those concerns, and I've expressed those concerns even with having the children. Especially when you read stories like news stories where people are being called pedophiles because they're a gay couple with a kid, that they're grooming and all that stuff. So I think about things like this don't say gay bill, and the legislation coming across multiple states, that's allowing this rhetoric to reappear. The laws haven't even changed, and this rhetoric has been moving forward for positive change, and here comes this negative rhetoric back. And I'm like, back in my little 80s, 90s growing up rural Appalachian queer brain going, oh God, I'm going to be killed. Or they're going to take my children away. Or the cops are going to be called on me as a parent, not because I'm seen as being a bad parent, but because I'm a gay person with a kid. And the kids are clearly, if you ever see me with my kids, we clearly don't match in terms of race. And so there's that additional like intersectionality component of me constantly trying to be open with, like, you can love with who you want, but also being aware of ethnocultural kind of empathy with regards to making sure that the children know they're not just coming from a queer family, they're also coming from a family, they're coming from a family that also was a black family that I don't have access to with these kids' biological parents because of them being foster children. And so I think in terms of how do I blend this narrative for these kids so that they feel richer in their own identities, because I struggled so much with mine growing up, not for like lack of trying or support, but just because I struggled. And I don't want that for my kids. I want them to understand who they are and to respect that and respect differences. And so I want them to, I think in terms of they're mixed race children coming from a queer parentage. And so what does that look like? They're foster kids. They've got all these additional layers that are just, it's always on my mind. It's heavy on my heart. Let me put it that way.
That then leads us to our last question. How would you like to see family planning and opportunities to grow in the future, especially in relation to acceptance?
I don't know. I don't think it's ever going to be perfect, and I wouldn't expect it to be like perfect 100% acceptance all over the world, because that's the beauty of the world of humanity, is that we're all different. I would, however, love to live in this world where I don't have to fear. I don't have to fear for myself. I don't have to fear for my children. I don't have to fear for people coming up like younger than me who want to have families as well, and being able to guide them very specifically on, like, this was my experience. I want them to have positive experiences. I want them to know that there is good in the world. And I want to help them with that, I suppose, like with my narrative. I had a positive experience. I've not had too many terrible experiences. I'm not saying that I've always had like wonderful experiences being a parent, a queer parent, within family planning. But I would love to see more, very specifically, of that positive from the beginning. Like hey, this is you. Okay, your parents. Without the questioning of, are you sure you want to do this? Or having to go through psychological evaluations just because you're a queer parent. Of, are you prepared for what this means? Are you prepared for being a parent of a foster kid, and being a parent of a child that you carried that was artificial insemination? Are you prepared for this? And so there's a lot of questions. There are so many questions that you have to think about, that it's a privilege. Like, people don't understand. This is where like privilege comes in. It's heterosexual privilege, right? I have to think of things that people take for granted. And that's what I would like to see more of. Not so much like the change or whatever with regards to everything has to be beautiful and whatnot, but at least for people to acknowledge that there's a lot of privilege that comes into, or heterosexual privilege specifically, that comes into family planning, that I, even as a parent, just foster children. It just take away the queer thing too. There's a lot of levels. There's a lot of levels to the choices that you make as in your family planning, but to have people be open-minded and willing to accept that you don't have to think about these things. You can just go have fun or family plan with your partner and have a baby or choose to adopt without having to go through these extra fears and anxieties and steps and legal processes that are quite a battle and sometimes exhausting, to be honest. That's really where I would like to see it change. Just more of the let's acknowledge that this is different. That's the first step to really making any changes. Let's accept, let's have the conversation. Let's have media representation. Let's have conversations with people about how this is different, how this is tougher. And parents are, like parenting in general, not easy. Because that's the thing about privilege. It's not saying that you're not having it hard. It's just saying you don't have to think about these things sometimes. And here we are, right, with the minorities and stigmatized groups, right?
Well, I think we both want to thank you for doing this interview and everything. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
This citizenship class has helped me become a citizen leader because it's made me learn a lot. It's made me open my eyes up to things that are really important that are happening around the world that not a lot of people know. And it's definitely has made me realize that I need to pay attention to things around me more and not be afraid to ask questions and learn.
It also allowed me to peer into the lives of the other groups around my life every single day. It's allowed me to understand their problems and think in their shoes. I believe that everyone should try and think about others when going about in their personal lives.